Hello, and welcome everyone to Aiken, South Carolina for the meeting of the Facilities Dispensation and Site Remediation Committee. I am Joyce Underwood, Chair of the committee, and this is Nurinder Malik, Co-Chair. The rest of our committee members are Gail Allensworth, Betty Cook, Eric Crossan, Eleanor Hobson, Doug Howard, Dan Kaminsky, and Robert Smith. We are going to talk about the Federal Facility Agreement Appendix E today, and some other things as they should come up. So, without further ado, this is our.
Get Avery to do her update.
Oh yeah, Avery's going to give her update. It wasn't on the script.
All right, this is set for like a giant here. Okay, Avery Hammett, DOE. This is really high.
Hold you up.
No, I'm good, thanks. Okay, I don't have a whole lot for you today, but thank you, because that's really high. Okay, there, that's much better, or a little better. Okay, I don't have a whole lot for you today, but I do have a few things. The site has issued an environmental bulletin on the solvent storage tanks Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which is Rrah, you'll often hear us talk about Rrah, permit revision, and there is a public meeting. The public comment period is open right now, and there is a public meeting on June 19th, which is next Tuesday, I think, at 2:30 at the Aiken County Public Library. So this is an opportunity for the public to come and review the changes to this permit and the closure plan, the closure activities for the solvent storage tanks, and learn more about what's going on with that. So it's a little bit out of our purview. It's more of the waste disposition group, but it is closure activity. So I figured that counted for us. And I wanted to let you all know that this was an opportunity. Do we do questions kind of midway through?
No,
or?
let's wait until the end,
Okay.
and then we'll do questions. You
Okay.
can.
And the other thing I have is something that Kathy Lewis mentioned briefly in her remediation techniques and innovations and technologies presentation back in North Augusta, but didn't focus on this at all, and it's something that has now been released in an SRNL little newspaper publication that they have internal to SRNL, but it is cleared for release, so I can share this, where they have used a drone with a camera on it to inspect the top of our two closed reactors. The reactor buildings, P and R area reactors, we closed in place, and we have to inspect the roof of the reactor to make sure there aren't any big cracks where rainwater could be getting in. And so this is a pretty neat technology partnering between the area completion group and the national lab and the University of somewhere, Maryland, or Virginia Tech, sorry. Sorry if that offends any major Virginia Tech fans. I didn't mean Maryland. So anyway, a good partnership, and the Department of Defense actually has been using some of these drone technologies for radiation detection drills and things on site too. So that, I'm sort of jumping into Zach's space with that one, but anyway, I wanted to let y'all know about this because this was something that Kathy Lewis had briefly mentioned that we were going to do, and we have done it. And the next step is to use the drones to apply some herbicide to kill some plants that are growing, which get started when a bunch of leaves and debris pile up in the corners of the concrete on the roof, and then birds come and fly and have eaten some berries, and they rest there for a minute, and lo and behold, a little berry bush starts growing. 9 months later, we have berry. No, just kidding. But they're going to use the drone to apply some herbicide and control that. And previously, we had to use a photographer in a helicopter taking the pictures, which is very low resolution. As you can imagine, they were a lot higher than this drone, and they didn't have the clarity. And then use a bucket ladder gizmo and spray herbicide, and it was much more involved worker safety issues with the height and all that stuff. So this way we're just going to use the drone. So it's a neat new use of existing technology that we are deploying on site. So just wanted to let y'all know about that. And I have this. There are other stories in here. I checked with the lab. I'm allowed to share this, so if anybody would like a copy of that article or the other articles, I have it, but that was it. Questions?
Narendra Malakab, about the closure plan, have you done the closure plan for the solvent tanks?
Yes, the plan, I'm going to defer to Jim if I go wrong here, but the closure plan was submitted to DHEC last year, and these changes are just updating the Rrah permit to bring it into line, in line with the closure plan activities. So does that sum that up?
So initially they were not in Rrah permit?
They have had a Rrah permit, correct? And this is just updating the permit to bring it in line with the contents of the closure plan and making sure that this thing says updates to the information, including the contact information, the contingency plan section, and extensive revision to the closure plan section, incorporating the information submitted to DHEC in May of 2017. So the permit was in place, but this is just updating it to make it have the most current information.
So these closures of these solvent tanks will be under Rrah or CERCLA?
Rrah, correct?
I believe that's right.
Yes.
Thank you.
So and that meeting is the 19th at 2:30, and I'm sure they can tell you in much more detail. Any other questions? Okey doke.
Okay, so we are here to discuss the presentation we were given at the May board meeting about the federal facility agreement appendix E. And if anybody had any questions, wanted to be clarified about it, questions, comments, concerns?
Narendra Malik. Once again, this federal facility agreement, this closure plan, is it part of the FFA or?
I'll answer this one, but if it gets any more technical, I'm going to turn it over to Sheila, who will be able to help us. But it's in Appendix H of the FFA.
Okay.
So it's not Appendix C or E, which are the two lists that you mostly hear about. The whole list of all the sites needing remediation, and then the 2-year window look at the list.
So
and
what
Appendix
is,
D,
what is,
too.
pardon me, what is Appendix C?
Appendix C is the list of all of the waste units identified on site that are not site evaluation units, but all the other units, right? 515? The 515 waste units.
And which appendix applies to tank farm?
I'm going to turn this over to Sheila.
Hi, my name is Sheila McFalls. I work for SRS. The tank farms are in Appendix C. They're also in Appendix E. They're in Appendix K. They're in multiple appendices within the FFA.
Thank you. Because some of the reports are for the tank farm leaks and releases.
Now that's probably done under the industrial wastewater treatment permit that the tank farm has. So they're initially closing the tanks under the industrial wastewater treatment permit. And then those tanks are listed in the FFA, and so we follow up the closures under the IWT with proposed plans, statement of basis proposed plan, and records of decisions under the FFA, so we can unify the two different regulatory documents.
I agree that they are listed under industrial wastewater treatment, but I vividly remember that if there is a leak in the tanks, they are covered under FFA.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions or comments about this presentation? Concerns that you folks had? If you remember, this is the one that Brian Hennessy gave, and he had the big 11 by 17 swim lane chart. That is a handout, yeah. I mean, that was a big document to look at and try to absorb. I thought that they did a great job of actually getting it updated this year. It's a little easier to read than it has been in the past, I thought. So it looks really good. So Sheila, I assume that you all had a hand in that. Yeah, good job.
Should I dive into the other thing?
Yeah, Dan.
So sorry I wasn't at the full board, but the just kind of drawing some conclusions. It looks like a lot of the dates have shifted significantly. Was there much discussion at the full board about shifting of dates and the whys and wherefores?
Do you want to talk about it, Bob?
Yeah, there was quite a bit of discussion.
Can I get you in the microphone though? Just so we can get it recorded.
Okay. Robert Smith, CAB. Yeah, there was quite a bit of discussion about the shifting of dates. I can't remember, there was one specific event that caused most of it. I can't remember exactly what the particulars are. Maybe James can.
No, I don't remember, but Avery's taking a quick look, and I think that they're going to come to a conclusion on how to best respond to that.
Narendra Malka, I think they were based on the budget.
That makes sense.
Avery Hammett, DOE. I believe the discussion was based around the work going on in D area, that has been the primary focus of the remediation program and had caused a bunch of the dates to shift, but that they were going to be able to pull in a few activities back to the right or to the left, back towards the sooner. And I think that's what, at least I know that was one of the discussions at the full board.
They were able to pull at least one or two of them forward.
Right. They were going to bump Dunbarton Bay, and some of the groundwater remediation activities were going to be done sooner than had originally been projected. So, those are the only things. Yeah. So I think that was part of the discussion.
Any other thoughts, folks?
Do you want me to wait on Gil?
Hmm?
You want me to wait for Gil?
No.
Dive in?
Hmm?
Dive in?
Yeah, no, I mean, whatever you want to do.
Well,
Waiting for whom?
Gil.
Did Gil have a specific topic? Or?
He did, but,
So if you remember at the May full board meeting, Gil talked a little bit about how at the Carlsbad Roswell meeting, he was mentioning infrastructure and how important that was to the CAB, and how each committee really needed to take a look at how they could make recommendations along that. And Joyce had a conversation a little bit with Avery today about possibly adding it to the work plan. We haven't talked to the DDFOs yet about adding a specific work plan topic for this committee on infrastructure, but it might be a good idea, and Joyce wanted to get some feedback from you guys on what you thought and some activities that you might want to take a look at in terms of general site infrastructure, not programmatically for the waste management folks, because Sunny and Jim's folks, they all talk about infrastructure with their programs, and Maxine, she talks about infrastructure with L Basin and H Canyon and those facilities. But the general site infrastructure, do you have any interest in that and wanting to explore that some more?
Narendra Malka, I think at the full board meeting I did talk to Avery, and we just had a few minutes ago a conversation. There may not be site-specific, project-specific infrastructure, but the infrastructure, especially which he mentioned, is about drinking water supply, which is very old and it needs upgrading, and maybe some sanitary systems also which may need upgrading. And I think one of their representative is going to come in and make a presentation at one of our full board meeting. I don't know which day, but she mentioned they will come and then we'll pick up the ball and run from there.
So, any other thoughts on that?
Joyce Underwood, CAB. I have a question per clarification about what we can do. Given what went on with the pension recommendation, are we in a position to make a recommendation regarding budget?
So I wouldn't suggest that any recommendations that you make be budget dependent. That's
Okay.
not necessarily something that you always need to take into account as a board with the recommendations that you make. From the citizen's perspective, if you feel like something needs to be addressed by the department, then by all means let them know that you feel this needs to be addressed by the department, and then let them figure out how, if, when they can do that, and how, if, when can they would implement it. So
Broad strokes.
yeah, implementation is something that a department would address either down the road or in their reply. But what do you want to do? What do you want to see happen? Those are where your recommendations are. Those broad stroke plans, those citizen perspective ideals.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Does anybody have anything else to questions, comments, concerns? Oh, well, I have one more thing. Before I open for public comment, I just wanted to take this opportunity to invite everybody on the committee that if you have time, we need people for public tours, and that'd be really nice if somebody would volunteer. So just throwing that out there as a plug for the A&O committee. But after that, yes, definitely, we're going to open up
I'll
for...
volunteer for Saturdays.
Awesome. We totally need Saturdays. Don't you go to work late? They've got 8 a.m. slots.
I go to work all day.
All right. Well, now we will open up for public comment. Oh, wait, no, sorry. I had a question.
Doug Howard Cap. I do just want to reiterate what happened there when we were in New Mexico. Gil and I did have breakfast with the gentleman that was from the DOE, and what he did talk about and wanted us to place a lot of emphasis on is the infrastructure. And in doing a lot of reading, you know, the infrastructure in not only the Savannah River plant, but most of the plants throughout are very old. And whether or not people pay attention to putting the money into it is going to be up to how much, I guess, attention is paid to it. Because as we know, the government sometimes does not pay attention unless, you know, it hears the squeaky wheel squeaking. So yes, that is going to be a good area for us to focus on. Thank you.
Dan? Wait, that's your job.
I think
Go ahead, Dan.
Dan Kaminsky Camp. So it brings up just a question. Who's actually paying for infrastructure? Is that a shared expense from EM and others on site, or is EM strictly picking up the tab?
You got it.
Zach Todd, DOE. So it really just depends. So as you know, we recently stood up PBS 42, and there are some things that could be classified as common infrastructure, like an EOC perhaps. But the majority of things, as what we call common infrastructure, like the roads, the bridges, things of that nature, the water lines, sewer lines, are actually funded through the indirect pool. And those are all the tenants, not all the tenants, but the tenants are assessed a tax based off of you know, how much money they get in a particular year, and then it's allocated.
It's like out of MinSafe or out of MinSafe funding, or how's that shown on budgets?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So you said it's, sorry, Dan Kaminsky Cab. So you're saying it sort of acts like a tax on the different PBSs out there?
Yeah, so if you kind of look at like our presidential request, for example, you'll see the direct work line, you'll see MinSafe, you'll see things that kind of go towards pension, and then there's an overall category that's called the indirects. And within those indirects are the things like landlord services, ESS, kind of the lab, landlord services, we kind of the common infrastructure, there's a G&A and stuff like that. So that's where those dollars are kind of shown. It's not taken out of MinSafe.
Part of his question was EM and NNSA.
Yeah. So NNSA pays a share, and then EM pays a share as well.
So, and this is kind of an opinion, who's paying more of their fair share, EM or NNSA?
Yeah. So.
Is that transparent?
Well, so it really depends. Like there's things like, say, the MOX project that's kind of grandfathered in that doesn't really necessarily pay an indirect tax. But as far as like the NNSA versus EM split, it's fair, it's equitable. It's based off of dollars and stuff like that. But there are certain projects, the MOX project, that's kind of grandfathered in and they don't pay the indirects, and that kind of gets brought up time to time. But
Bob Smith, Cap. Just so make sure I understand though, does infrastructure cost come out of the overall budget appropriation? And doesn't the fact that we are going to be underfunded based on what we requested indicate that likelihood of being able to pay for the infrastructure improvements isn't going to happen?
you want to do that from a program perspective, or you want to do that from
Jim Folk Dewey, let me start with the program side, then you can capture the overall side. So, and it's important, I think James started to mention this earlier, you really have two different pools of infrastructure, right? So those things that we consider inside the fence, so again, I'll talk parochially here to liquid waste program, so PBS 14C, a portion of my 14C budget is for infrastructure within the liquid waste program. And I budget for that each year, request so much for that year. Now again, all those activities are prioritized. So a lot of the water lines, steam lines like that are inside my fence, I end up paying for out of 14C. Now, when you get into budget cuts, potential budget cuts, from, like for instance with the House and Senate mark, then we have to go back through and prioritize that against MinSafe was mentioned, production, right, and then infrastructure are really the kind of the key items that are going on there. And quite honestly, infrastructure is typically one of those that you have to look at. Can I live without an upgrade or not? So I mean, you know, if it's something that we can push off a little bit, certainly look at that and go process more waste or close a tank or however that is. So within the fence, they are competing against each other.
Thank you.
Joyce Underwood, Cab. I'm afraid that this is going to involve adding something to the work plan, but is there a way that we can get some kind of a document that shows the age of these things that we're worried about?
So if we add infrastructure to the work plan, I think that we could probably add that as part of the presentation and everything. You were about to say?
Yeah, Avery and I were kind of just.
Can I get y'all to?
Avery and I were kind of discussing, and we think that it'd be more the strategic legacy management.
Okay.
So I think we'd have to kind of go back to kind of confirm, but I think that's kind of the way that this would lean.
But we could get that document from them?
Of course,
Okay.
we'd be able to do it.
Like, that information exists.
Yeah, no. It wasn't as we were not going to do it. We're just trying to I guess focus the conversation and make sure it's going to the right home. That's all.
Okay.
Avery Hammett, DOE. The purview of this committee is site remediation, and there are systems that support the site remediation activities. So you could bend it that that would be the purview of this committee, but really the overall site stuff would fit better under strategic and legacy management, I think. But we could be sure that we covered specific areas that would be of specific interest to this committee too. So we'll make sure that that gets in there.
And so, either way, the presentation, if we get it approved and get it added to the work plan, we'd be given it a full board meeting anyway. And so you'd be able to take that information and figure out how it would best apply to what you're working on here and what Strategic and Legacy Management is working on in their committee, and do the same activity. Each of the other committees would have that same opportunity to take that information and work it into what they're doing and bend that in. But I think that the real push from Gil and Doug is encouraging everyone to just take a look at not just what is going on with programs, but what is supporting those programs as far as infrastructure and what makes the site run in the background.
If there are no further questions, we will open up for public comment.
You has none.
Of which there is none. So with that, we shall adjourn.
Thank you, everyone.
Good girl.